had never expected to die on an alien world, much less bleed out in the arms of a princess whose species he couldn't even pronounce the name of correctly. The called there, which sounded like wind chimes in a hurricane when they spoke it. 2, it just meant the place where everything wants to kill you. The human colony ship Endeavour had crash-landed on 3 months ago after a navigation malfunction sent them spiraling through uncharted space. Of the 800 colonists aboard, only 47 survived the impact. The rest were either dead on arrival or picked off by the planet's hostile wildlife in the first week. It was a death trap wrapped in beauty. Crystal forests stretched across continents, their razor-sharp branches singing deadly melodies in the wind. The ground itself pulsed with bioluminescent veins that could electrocute anything foolish enough to step in the wrong place. And the creatures had seen things that every law of biology he'd learned in his xenobiology courses back on Earth. But they were different. They were elegant, almost ethereal beings with translucent skin that shifted colors with their emotions. Their bones were hollow like birds, making them incredibly light and graceful. Most stood nearly 8 feet tall, with elongated limbs and faces that seemed carved from moonlight. They moved like dancers, even in combat, and their technology was so advanced it looked like magic. When the first discovered the human survivors, most of their kind wanted to eliminate what they saw as primitive invaders. The humans were ugly to them, short, stocky, covered in thick skin and coarse hair. They moved like wild animals, they smelled strange, and their technology was laughably primitive. The High Council debated for days whether to put the humans out of their misery or simply let the planet do it for them. But Princess had argued for mercy. She was the daughter of Queen, ruler of the Northern Dominion and one of the most powerful beings on, had always been considered odd by standards, too curious about other species, too willing to question tradition. When she saw the human survivors struggling against impossible odds, something in her crystalline heart stirred with compassion. Against her mother's wishes, convinced a small faction of her people to help the humans establish a basic camp in the ruins of their ship. She provided them with energy shields to protect against the crystal storms, water purification systems that could handle toxic rain, and medical supplies that kept their wounded alive. Had been suspicious of the princess from the beginning. In his experience, which included 3 previous colony missions, aliens who offered help usually wanted something in return. He'd seen too many human settlements get wiped out by species who pretended to be friendly until they had what they needed. But was different. She spent hours learning human languages, struggling with the harsh consonants that her musical vocal cords weren't designed for. She asked endless questions about Earth, about human culture, about why they had left there to find new places to live. She seemed genuinely fascinated by their primitive technology and their stubborn refusal to give up in the face of overwhelming odds. The first time saved her life, it was almost by accident. They had been exploring the wreckage of the Endeavour's cargo bay, looking for salvageable equipment, when a pack of apex predators found them. The creatures were called Void Stalkers by the massive, shape-shifting beasts that could phase in and out of reality like living shadows. Energy weapons had no effect on them. Her people's advanced technology, for all its elegance and power, couldn't touch something that existed partially outside normal space-time, but had something they had never seen before, a simple shotgun loaded with depleted uranium shells. When the first Void Stalker materialized behind, didn't think. He just moved. The shotgun blast caught the creature's center mass, the uranium rounds disrupting whatever quantum field allowed it to phase shift. The beast collapsed with a sound like tearing reality, its form solidifying as it died. Stared at the dead predator, then at the primitive weapon in his hands. In her culture, personal combat was an art form, graceful, beautiful, almost ceremonial. What it done was brutal, efficient, and utterly without elegance. It was also completely effective against a threat that had terrorized her people for. How? She asked in heavily accented English. Shrugged, already reloading. Sometimes the simple solution is the right solution. That became the pattern. Would encounter some problem that technology couldn't solve, and would find a way to fix it with human stubbornness and improvised solutions. When their food synthesizers broke down, he showed her how to hunt and cook less toxic wildlife. When crystal storms damaged their shelters, he taught her how to build structures that bent instead of breaking. When medicine couldn't treat a plague that was spreading through both communities, he developed a cure using fermented plant extracts and what he called educated guessing. began spending more time at the human settlement than in her own palace. She learned to appreciate human food, human music, human humor. She started wearing simpler clothes instead of the elaborate gowns her station required. Most shocking of all, she began to question the rigid caste system that governed society. Her mother, Queen, watched this transformation with growing alarm. The Queen was ancient even by standards, having ruled for over 600 years. She had seen civilizations rise and fall, species flourish and go extinct. In her experience, contact with primitive species always corrupted the advanced ones. She had tolerated her daughter's charity project with the humans, but this was going too far. The crisis came when a rival faction, the Southern Empire, launched an attack on the Northern Dominion. Emperor had been looking for an excuse to challenge Queen's rule, and the presence of alien invaders gave him the perfect justification. He brought an army of 50,000 warriors, backed by the most advanced weapons in military history. The battle that followed was unlike anything had seen in centuries. Crystalline war machines the size of skyscrapers clashed across the planet's surface, while fighter craft that moved faster than thought dueled in the purple skies. Energy weapons that could crack continents lit up the horizon in displays of raw power. Queen's forces were outnumbered 3-1, and Empress technology was more advanced. Within hours, it became clear that the Northern Dominion was losing. The Queen's personal guard was being systematically destroyed, her cities were falling one by one, and enemy forces were closing in on the capital. That's when Princess made the decision that would change everything. She went to the human settlement and asked for help. "My people are dying," she said, her translucent skin cycling through colors that had learned meant desperation and fear. "Our weapons, our ships, our shields, nothing can stand against new technology. We have hours, maybe less." The human survivors numbered 31 by this point. They had 3 working vehicles, a handful of functional weapons, and absolutely no business getting involved in a war between godlike alien civilizations. Every rational part of his mind told him to politely decline and hope the winner of the war would leave them alone. But he really looked at her. This being who could have lived in luxury for centuries had chosen to spend her time with a handful of primitive refugees. She had risked her position, her relationship with her mother, her entire future to help creatures her people considered barely above animals. And now she was asking them to return the favor. "What do you need?" asked. The plan they came up with was insane. Emperor's forces had one weakness. They were so advanced, so reliant on their quantum-based technology, that they had no defenses against truly primitive attacks. Their shields could stop energy weapons that could destroy planets, but they weren't designed to handle kinetic projectiles moving at relatively slow speeds. And his team spent 6 hours converting their remaining vehicles into improvised weapons platforms. They mounted every gun, rocket, and explosive device they could salvage from the Endeavour onto hover trucks that had never been designed for combat. They filled their ammunition with every piece of metal they could find: screws, pipes, engine parts, even eating utensils. The human fleet that attacked Empress forces looked like something out of an ancient history book compared to the crystalline war machines it faced. But appearances can be deceiving. When truck-mounted punched a depleted uranium rod through the flagship's quantum shields, the effect was devastating. The primitive projectile tore through advanced armor like it was made of paper, triggering a chain reaction that crippled the massive vessel. The other humans followed his lead, their improvised weapons wreaking havoc among enemy forces that had no idea how to defend against such crude tactics. Fighter craft that could dance between dimensions found themselves swatted out of the sky by missiles that moved too slowly to trigger their automated defenses. Ground troops protected by energy shields that could deflect plasma beams died when human shotguns filled them with shrapnel. The tide of battle began to turn, but not without cost. One by one, the human vehicles were destroyed by return fire. Watched his friends and fellow survivors die in explosions of light and crystal, their primitive vehicles no match for the advanced weapons targeting them once the element of surprise was lost. By the time the last of Empress forces retreated, Only was still alive. His truck was a burning wreck, half his body was covered in burns from energy weapon impacts, and he was pretty sure at least 3 of his ribs were broken. But Princess was safe, Queen's forces had won, and the Northern Dominion was secure. Tried to climb out of his destroyed vehicle and immediately collapsed. The adrenaline that had kept him going through the battle was wearing off, and he was discovering just how badly he was hurt. Reached him first, her hands glowing with the soft light used for emergency healing. "You did it," she said, her voice breaking with emotion as colors swirled across her skin like aurora. "You saved us all." Tried to smile, tasting blood. "Just returning the favor, princess." That's when he passed out in her arms, his human blood mixing with her crystalline tears, as she held him and whispered words in her own language that roughly translated to "my brave, impossible fool." He woke up 3 days later in the Royal Medical Facility, surrounded by technology that made human hospitals look like medieval torture chambers. Was there when he opened his eyes, still wearing the simple clothes she preferred instead of her royal gowns. Her skin was a soft blue color that he had learned meant relief and happiness. "The doctors say you'll live," she said, switching to English so the medical staff couldn't understand. Though they're amazed that such a primitive biological system managed to survive at all. Laughed, then immediately regretted it as pain shot through his chest. "We're tougher than we look." "Yes," said quietly, "you are." Over the next week, as recovered, the full scope of what had happened became clear. The human intervention had not just saved the Northern Dominion, it had fundamentally changed how viewed warfare, technology, and their place in the galaxy. For the first time in their recorded history, primitive tactics had proven superior to advanced ones. Word spread across and beyond. The species that had considered humans barely above animals now spoke of them with something approaching awe. The crude, brutal effectiveness of human warfare became the subject of intense study. Military academies that had existed for thousands of years suddenly found their textbooks obsolete. But not everyone was pleased with this development. Queen had watched her daughter's continued association with the humans with growing unease. The war had proven that these primitive aliens were more dangerous than anyone had imagined. They had capabilities that science couldn't explain, tactical instincts that their models couldn't predict, and a reckless bravery that bordered on insanity. Most disturbing of all, they were changing her daughter. Had always been willful, but now she was openly challenging royal protocols, questioning ancient traditions, and spending every free moment with the human who had saved their civilization. The queen had ruled for 6 centuries by understanding the long-term consequences of every decision, and she could see where this path led. The humans would have to go, all of them, starting with. But that was a conversation for another day. For now was content to recover under the care of the most beautiful alien he had ever seen, unaware that he had just made the most powerful enemy of his life. Outside his window, the crystal forests of sang their deadly songs in the wind, and somewhere in the royal palace, Queen began planning the next chapter of this unlikely story. The assassination attempt came on a Tuesday, which would later find ironic since didn't actually have days of the week. The planet's 3 suns created a complex cycle that made traditional timekeeping impossible, but humans needed familiar patterns to stay sane, so they had imposed Earth's calendar on their new reality. Was working in the makeshift laboratory that Princess had helped him establish in the ruins of the Endeavor's science bay. He was trying to reverse engineer medical technology, not to copy it. Human science was centuries away from understanding quantum biomanipulation, but to find ways their crude techniques could complement the aliens' advanced healing methods. The breakthrough had come when he realized that medicine, for all its sophistication, couldn't handle certain types of cellular damage. Their bodies were so perfectly designed, so precisely balanced, that they had no natural defenses against genetic corruption. A simple virus that would barely make a human sneeze could kill in hours. Had been working on a hybrid treatment protocol, combining human antibiotics with quantum field therapy, when the wall exploded inward. The assassin was unlike any had ever seen. Where most of the species was elegant and graceful, this one moved like liquid death. Its translucent skin had been modified to shift through the entire spectrum, making it nearly invisible against any background. Its elongated limbs had been enhanced with crystalline implants that could extend into razor-sharp weapons. Didn't think. 3 months of living on had taught him that thinking was a luxury he couldn't afford when something wanted to kill him. He dove behind a lab table as crystalline blades sliced through the air where his head had been, then rolled toward his emergency kit. Every human survivor carried an emergency kit, lessons learned from too many close calls. Contained a sidearm, 3 grenades, a combat knife, and a device he had invented himself. a sonic disruptor that interfered with nervous systems. He'd originally designed it to stun the local wildlife, but field testing had shown it worked just as well on hostile aliens. The assassin moved like it was dancing, each motion flowing seamlessly into the next. Its blade arms carved through slab equipment like it was made of paper, destroying months of work in seconds. Could see the precision in every movement. This wasn't random destruction, it was surgical elimination of everything that represented human cooperation. Triggered the sonic disruptor as the assassin rounded the table. The device emitted a subsonic pulse that disrupted the quantum fields in nervous systems, causing temporary paralysis. The assassin stumbled, its perfect coordination suddenly clumsy. That was all the opening needed. He put 3 rounds center mass from his sidearm, then added a 4th to the head for good measure. The bullets were simple lead slugs, but they did the job. The assassin collapsed, its modified body sparking with damaged implants. Was checking the body when Princess arrived with her personal guard. The guards moved in perfect formation, their energy weapons trained on every possible threat vector. Moved among them like their choreographed center, her skin cycling through colors that had learned meant battle readiness and controlled fury. "Are you hurt?" she asked, switching to English as she examined for injuries. "I'm fine," said, then gestured to the destroyed lab. "Can't say the same for 3 months of research." Knelt beside the dead assassin, her face grave. "This is a Void Walker, the Queen's personal executioners. They're modified for stealth and elimination of high-value targets." She looked at with something like awe. No one has ever survived a Void Walker attack before. Shrugged, already beginning to clean up the mess. First time for everything. But even as he said it, he knew this changed everything. Queen had just tried to have him killed, which meant the fragile peace between humans and was over. It also meant that someone in the royal court considered him important enough to eliminate, which was probably not a good thing for his long-term life expectancy. Must have been thinking the same thing. Her skin had shifted to deep purple, which had learned meant serious contemplation mixed with growing anger. "My mother sent this creature," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She wants you dead." "Yeah, I kind of figured that out when it tried to slice my head off." Stood, her full height making her tower over even more than usual. "This is not acceptable. You saved our civilization. You have done nothing but help my people. She has no right." "Actually, she has every right," interrupted. "This is her planet, her kingdom, her daughter. I'm just an alien refugee who's been making trouble since day one." "You are not trouble," said, her skin flaring bright red with emotion. You are. She struggled for the words, switching between English and her native language in her agitation. Waited patiently. He had learned that when got emotional, it was best to let her work through it at her own pace. "You are my friend," she finally said, the simple words carrying more weight than any royal declaration. "My closest friend, my only real friend." That hit harder than he had expected. In all his years exploring alien worlds, he had maintained professional distance from the species he encountered. It was safer that way. Emotional attachments led to poor decisions, and poor decisions got people killed. But somewhere along the way, this ethereal princess had slipped past his defenses. "Your mother's not wrong, though," said carefully. "I am changing things here. My people, what we've done, it's disrupting your society. Maybe it would be better if we left." Skin went completely white, the equivalent of shock. "Leave. Where would you go? Your ship is destroyed. You have no means of traveling between stars." "We'll figure something out. We always do." "No," the word came out with such force that the air around them seemed to vibrate. "I will not allow it. You belong here now. This is your home." Before could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the palace complex. The sound was unlike anything human technology could produce, a harmonic resonance that seemed to penetrate directly into the listener's bones. Guards immediately shifted into combat formation, their weapons powering up with crystalline wines. "What's happening?" asked. Skin had gone black with silver highlights, absolute terror mixed with desperate determination. "Mother has activated the palace guard. She's declaring martial law." The implications hit like a physical blow. Queen wasn't just trying to eliminate him quietly. She was staging what amounted to a military coup against her own daughter. In human terms, it would be like the president ordering the Secret Service to arrest Congress. "She can't do that," said, then immediately realized how stupid that sounded. Can she? She is the queen, said, her voice hollow. She can do anything she chooses. The question is whether my guards will obey her or me. They got their answer within minutes. Captain, the commander of personal guard, approached them with obvious reluctance. His skin was cycling through colors didn't recognize, some complex mixture of loyalty, duty, and internal conflict. Your Highness, the captain said, speaking informal. I have received direct orders from Her Majesty. The human is to be taken into custody immediately. On what charges? Demanded. Corruption of royal blood, conspiracy against the crown, and violation of species purity laws. Didn't need a translation to understand the subtext. Queen was accusing her daughter of being romantically involved with a primitive alien, which apparently was some kind of capital crime in law. The fact that it wasn't actually true, and had never been anything more than friends, wouldn't matter in a royal court that had already made up its mind. Those charges are false, said, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone born to rule. I order you to stand down. Captain's skin darkened further. Your Highness, I am bound by oath to obey the reigning monarch. Please do not make this more difficult than necessary. Could see where this was heading. The captain was loyal to personally, but his duty to the crown superseded personal loyalty. In a few minutes, would be forced to choose between surrendering her friend to certain death or ordering her guards to fight against their own queen. It wasn't much of a choice. Captain said, stepping forward before could respond. I surrender myself to royal justice. No one needs to get hurt here. No, said, grabbing his arm. I will not let them. You don't have a choice, said gently. And neither do I. This was always going to happen eventually. But as the guards moved to restrain him, was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Queen might have superior technology, absolute political power, and several thousand years of experience ruling a galactic civilization. But she had made one critical mistake. She had given him time to prepare. The detention facility beneath the royal palace was a marvel of engineering. The cells were constructed from crystalline matrices that could adapt to any prisoner's biology, providing the exact environmental conditions needed to keep them alive while preventing any possibility of escape. Energy fields replaced physical bars, creating a perfectly secure containment system. Sat in his cell and admired the craftsmanship while he waited for his execution. They did everything beautifully, even their prisons. The walls pulsed with soft light that adjusted to his circadian rhythms, the temperature maintained itself at exactly the level his biology required, and the air was filtered and purified to Earth-normal standards. It was also completely escape-proof, which was going to make his plan much more interesting. Had been in the cell for 6 hours when Princess arrived. She was accompanied by 2 Royal Guard members and looked like she hadn't slept since his arrest. Her skin was cycling through a pattern had never seen before, grief, anger, and determination swirling together in complex spirals. I have convinced Mother to grant you a formal trial, she said without preamble. It will be before the High Court in 3 days. That's very generous of her, said, though they both knew it was meaningless. Trials were elaborate theater designed to legitimize predetermined outcomes. Queen had already decided he was guilty. The trial was just a formality. I will testify on your behalf, continued. I will tell them what you have done for our people, how you saved our civilization, and destroy your relationship with your mother in the process. Skin flared bright gold, defiance mixed with absolute resolve. She destroyed that when she tried to murder my friend. Studied her face, seeing the pain she was trying to hide behind royal composure. This wasn't just about him anymore. Queen's actions had forced a fundamental choice between loyalty to the crown and personal integrity. For someone raised to believe those 2 things were identical, the conflict was tearing her apart. There might be another way, said carefully. What do you mean? Glanced at the guards, then switched to English. Your mother's not really angry about me specifically. She's angry about what I represent, change, disruption to the established order, if I were to disappear from the equation. You are not going to sacrifice yourself, said, her accent thickening with emotion. I will not allow it. I'm not talking about sacrifice, I'm talking about escape. Stared at him for a long moment, her skin cycling through colors too quickly for him to interpret. Escape from this facility is impossible. The security systems are perfect against capabilities, interrupted. but they weren't designed to contain humans. Over the next 20 minutes, speaking in rapid English while the guards grew increasingly suspicious, outlined his plan. It was insane, dangerous, and relied on at least 6 different things going exactly right. It was also the only chance they had. The plan hinged on one simple fact. Technology was designed around their species' natural abilities and limitations. They could manipulate quantum fields, had perfect coordination and balance, and possessed reflexes that operated at near light speed. Their security systems were designed to counter those specific advantages. What they couldn't counter was good, old-fashioned human stupidity. The crystalline matrix that formed Cell was held together by quantum field generators that maintained molecular cohesion across multiple dimensional phases. It was impervious to energy weapons, physical force, and any form of technological interference. But it wasn't designed to handle a localized electromagnetic pulse generated by a makeshift device built from components that had no business working together. Had spent his 6 hours in custody building what amounted to a primitive EMP grenade using the cell's own systems. The environmental controls contained quantum processors that he could overload with the right sequence of commands. The lighting system used crystalline matrices that would resonate at specific frequencies if properly modulated. And the waste disposal unit, because even alien prisons needed working toilets, contained enough conductive material to create a focused electromagnetic pulse. The device he built looked like a collection of random junk held together with torn fabric from his clothes. To eyes, it was clearly non-functional, a desperate attempt by a primitive mind to create something useful from incompatible components. Which was exactly what was counting on. When he triggered the device during the shift change between guard rotations, the effect was spectacular. The electromagnetic pulse overloaded the quantum field generators maintaining his cell's integrity, causing a cascade failure that spread through the detention facility's entire security grid. For exactly 47 seconds, every cell in the prison complex was offline. Was out of his cell and halfway to the facility's central hub before the emergency systems came online. Princess was waiting for him there with a small group of her most trusted guards, the ones who had chosen personal loyalty over royal duty. "This is treason," Captain said, but his skin colors showed relief rather than anger. "We are all committing treason." "Yes," said simply, "we are." The escape from the royal palace was a running battle through corridors that hadn't seen violence in centuries. Queen's forces had every advantage: superior numbers, better equipment, intimate knowledge of the facility's layout. But they were fighting an enemy that didn't follow the rules of civilized warfare. And his human-style tactics had infected guards with new ways of thinking. Instead of engaging in elegant duels with energy weapons, they used ambush tactics and improvised explosives. Instead of flowing through combat like dancers, they fought dirty, used cover, and focused on efficiency over artistry. By the time they reached the palace's landing bays, half of guards were dead and the survivors were wounded. But they had accomplished the impossible. They had fought their way out of the most secure facility commandeered the fastest ship in the royal fleet, a scout vessel designed for deep space reconnaissance. As they lifted off with Queen's entire air force in pursuit, realized that they had crossed a line they could never uncross. They were fugitives now, enemies of the crown, exiles from the only civilization on the planet that could keep them alive. But as he watched pilot their ship through a dogfight that should have been impossible to survive, her skin blazing with colors that meant absolute determination and fierce joy, realized something else. For the first time since landing on, he felt like they might actually have a chance. 3 months in exile taught that revolution was 90% logistics and 10% desperate improvisation. The romantic stories never mentioned how much time you spent calculating food supplies, maintaining equipment, and trying to convince people that your cause was worth dying for. They had established their base in the Shattered Reach, a region that had been devastated by ancient wars and abandoned for thousands of years. The crystalline forest here had been twisted into impossible shapes by weapons that bent space itself, creating a maze of reflecting surfaces that made orbital surveillance useless. The ground was with trenches that ran deeper than mountains were tall, and the very air shimmered with residual energy from battles fought when human civilization was still learning to make fire. It was also the perfect place to hide a growing rebellion. Word of Princess' escape had spread across faster than Queen could suppress it. The story grew in the telling. The princess who had her mother for love, the human who had fought gods and won, the impossible alliance that was challenging 10,000 years of tradition. Within weeks, they were receiving messages from dissidents across the planet. Most of the support came from younger who had grown tired of their society's rigid caste system. Friendship with humans had inspired them to question other ancient traditions. Why couldn't different castes intermingle? Why was technological innovation discouraged in favor of preserving classical forms? Why did the old ways matter more than individual happiness? But some support came from unexpected sources. Military commanders who had studied the human intervention in the war against Emperor and realized their entire understanding of warfare was obsolete. Scientists who wanted to study human biology and psychology. Even a few members of the High Court who privately believed Queen's rule had become too rigid for a changing galaxy. Found himself at the center of something he had never intended to start. He had just wanted to help his fellow survivors find a place to live. Now he was somehow the co-leader of a revolution that was reshaping civilization. "The northern provinces have declared for us," reported Commander, a military defector who had become their intelligence chief. His skin was cycling through patterns that indicated cautious optimism mixed with strategic calculation. "That gives us control of nearly a quarter of the planet's manufacturing capacity." "What about the Southern Empire?" asked. She was studying a holographic map of that showed the current political situation in real time. Regions loyal to Queen glowed blue, areas under rebel control showed green, and contested territories flickered between the two colors. "Emperor is maintaining neutrality," replied. "He seems content to let us weaken each other while he consolidates his own power." Nodded, unsurprised. Politicians were the same everywhere in the galaxy. They never got involved in someone else's civil war unless they could profit from it. Was probably planning to swoop in and claim victory once the rebels and royalists had exhausted themselves fighting each other. "We need something that changes the equation," said. "A victory so decisive that the neutral factions have to pick a side." Skin shifted to deep purple, serious contemplation. "What do you have in mind?" Pointed to a blue region near the planet's equator. "The Quantum Research Institute. It's where your people develop new technology, right? If we could capture it." "Impossible," said immediately. "The Institute is protected by the Royal Guard's elite units. The facility itself is shielded by defensive systems that could withstand planetary bombardment. Even if we committed our entire force, we couldn't break through." "Not with tactics," agreed. "But what if we didn't try to break through at all?" Over the next hour, outlined a plan that made every in the room uncomfortable. It violated every principle of honorable warfare, ignored established military doctrine, and relied on tactics that their species considered barbaric. It was also the only plan that might actually work. The Quantum Research Institute was built like a fortress, because that's essentially what it was. The facility contained the most advanced technology including experimental weapons that could reshape matter at the atomic level. The defensive systems were designed to stop anything short of a full-scale invasion by another galactic power. But they weren't designed to stop a small team of humans armed with mining equipment and a basic understanding of geology. Its plan was beautifully simple. Instead of attacking the Institute from above, where all the defenses were concentrated, they would attack from below. Its crust was riddled with natural cavern systems formed by the planet's unusual geology. A team could approach the Institute through underground passages, plant explosives at key structural points, and collapse the entire facility into the caverns beneath it. It was the kind of crude, destructive tactic that no would ever consider. Their culture valued preservation and elegance even in warfare. The idea of simply dropping a priceless research facility into a hole in the ground was genuinely shocking to them. Which was why it would work. The mission team consisted of 12 human survivors and 6 volunteers led by herself. The princess had insisted on participating despite the obvious risks. As she pointed out, if they were caught, her presence might be the only thing that prevented Queen from ordering their immediate execution. The underground approach took them through cavern systems that had never been mapped. They crawled through passages barely wide enough for human bodies, rappelled down shafts that dropped into absolute darkness, and waded through underground rivers that glowed with bioluminescent microorganisms. Though with their longer limbs and hollow bones, had particular difficulty with the tight spaces, but they adapted with typical grace. It took them 18 hours to reach the cavern directly beneath the Institute. The facility's foundations were exactly where the geological surveys had predicted, massive crystalline pillars that transferred the building's weight down to bedrock. The pillars were beautiful, flowing structures that seemed to grow from the stone itself, rather than being built on top of it. Almost felt bad about what he was going to do to them. The explosive charges were human-made, cobbled together from mining equipment and chemical compounds that barely qualified as proper explosives. By standards, they were primitive devices that belonged in a museum. But primitiveness had its advantages. The Institute's sensors were calibrated to detect advanced threats, not crude chemical explosives. Placed the charges personally, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was doing. The Quantum Research Institute contained centuries of accumulated knowledge, technological marvels that human science wouldn't understand for generations. When those charges detonated, irreplaceable discoveries would be lost forever. But revolutions always had a price, and the alternative was watching Queen use that same technology to crush any hope of change. The explosions came at exactly midnight time. The crystalline support pillars shattered like glass, their quantum-enhanced structure failing catastrophically once the initial damage disrupted their molecular bonds. The Institute's massive bulk, no longer supported from below, dropped into the cavern system with a sound like breaking planets. The facility's defensive systems tried to compensate, energy shields flaring to life as emergency protocols engaged. But the shields were designed to deflect attacks from outside, not to prevent the building from falling into a hole. Within minutes, one of the most secure installations on had become a pile of rubble at the bottom of a very deep cave. Queen's response was swift and brutal. Within hours of the Institute's destruction, royal forces began bombarding suspected rebel positions from orbit. Cities that had declared support found themselves under siege. The Queen issued ultimatums that amounted to surrender immediately or be destroyed. But instead of breaking the rebellion, the escalation had the opposite effect. Who had been neutral found themselves horrified by their Queen's willingness to destroy her own people to maintain power. Military units that had remained loyal began defecting in large numbers. Even members of the Royal Guard started questioning orders that seemed designed to damage itself rather than restore order. The tipping point came when Emperor finally chose a side. But instead of supporting Queen as everyone expected, he declared for the rebels. "The Northern Queen has become a tyrant," he announced in a broadcast that reached across the planet. "She destroys our heritage to preserve her rule. She orders to fight over the friendship of aliens. This is not the leader our people deserve." Suspected that declaration had more to do with political opportunism than moral conviction. The emperor could probably read the changing winds as well as anyone, and supporting the winning side was always good policy. But whatever his motivations, the Southern Empire's entry into the war marked the beginning of the end for Queen's reign. The final battle took place in orbit above's primary city, where the Queen had retreated with the last of her loyal forces. Royal warships that had dominated space for centuries faced off against a combined fleet of rebels, defectors, and Southern Imperial vessels. The engagement was fought with weapons that could crack continents, in a display of power that lit up the system's three suns. Watch the battle from the bridge of command ship, feeling utterly useless. This was warfare on a scale that humans could barely comprehend, fought with technology that made their most advanced weapons look like stone tools. There was nothing he could contribute except moral support and tactical advice that probably wouldn't be relevant at this scale of conflict. But the battle's outcome had been determined long before the first shots were fired. Queen's forces were outnumbered 3-1, and most of her remaining supporters were fighting more from duty than conviction. When her flagship's shields failed and fleet closed in for the killing blow, the Queen's remaining vessels began surrendering in. Queen herself was captured trying to escape in a single-pilot fighter, her massive royal persona reduced to a desperate fugitive fleeing into the void. When they brought her aboard ship in restraints, was shocked by how old she looked. The immortal ruler who had seemed like a force of nature was just another person, diminished by defeat and bitter at the loss of everything she had spent centuries building. The confrontation between mother and daughter took place in the ship's council chamber, with Present as a silent witness to the end of an age. Queen's skin had gone completely, the color of absolute defeat, while blazed with the complex patterns that indicated authority mixed with sorrow. "You have destroyed everything," the former queen said, her voice carrying the weight of genuine grief. 10,000 years of civilization swept away for the sake of alien primitives. "I have saved our people from stagnation," replied, her tone gentle but implacable. "From a system that valued tradition more than growth, order more than justice." "And what will you replace it with? The crude barbarism of these humans, their violent solutions to complex problems." Glanced at, then back at her mother. "I will replace it with something new. A civilization that values both wisdom and change, that learns from others instead of dismissing them as inferior." Queen laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "You are naive, daughter. In a generation, maybe two, your human pets will multiply and spread across our world. They will consume everything in their path, as primitive species always do. And when they no longer need our protection, they will turn on us. Maybe, admitted, but maybe they will surprise us they have before." The old queen looked directly at for the first time since her capture. "And you, human, are you proud of what you have accomplished? You have toppled a civilization that was ancient when your species was still learning to make fire." Met her gaze steadily. "I'm proud that I helped my friend become the person she wanted to be. Everything else was her choice." Queen stared at him for a long moment, her skin cycling through colors he couldn't interpret. Perhaps that is the most frightening thing of all, that it truly was her choice. The new government that emerged from the revolution was unlike anything had ever seen. Queen, she had insisted on keeping the traditional title despite the democratic reforms, established a system that blended wisdom with human pragmatism. The rigid caste system was abolished in favor of merit-based advancement. Scientific research was encouraged instead of constrained by tradition. And for the first time in their recorded history, began actively seeking contact with other species instead of isolating themselves from the galaxy. The changes weren't without growing pains. Conservative factions continued to resist, sometimes violently. Economic disruptions caused by the rapid social changes led to shortages and unrest, and the integration of human survivors into society created cultural tensions that took years to resolve. But the changes were irreversible. A new generation grew up believing that change was possible, that tradition could be questioned, and that other species might have valuable contributions to make. The isolation that had defined their civilization was ending, replaced by a cautious but genuine curiosity about the wider galaxy. Found his role in the new order somewhat paradoxical. Officially, he held no government position and had no political authority. Unofficially, he was probably the second most influential person on the planet. When problems arose that conventional solutions couldn't handle, people turned to the human who had somehow become their unofficial philosopher of practical change. It was a responsibility he had never wanted and wasn't sure he was qualified for. But as pointed out with amusement, qualifications had never stopped him before. The conversation had been dreading came on the first anniversary of the revolution. He was in his new laboratory, a proper facility this time, not an improvised workspace in the ruins of a crashed ship, when found him. Her skin was cycling through patterns he had learned to associate with important but difficult topics. "The Southern Empire has offered to transport you and the other survivors to human space," she said without preamble. "Emperor has ships capable of making the journey, and he owes us several significant favors." Set down the quantum scanner he had been calibrating and looked at her carefully. "And you think I should go?" "I think you should have the choice. You never chose to stay on, circumstances trapped you here. Now that you're free to leave, you deserve to know that the option exists." It was the conversation had been expecting for months. The human survivors had accomplished everything they had set out to do. They had survived, established a secure place in society, and even helped reshape that society for the better. There was no practical reason for them to stay, and every logical argument suggested they should return to their own species. But logic wasn't everything. "What do you want me to do?" asked. Skin shifted to colors he had never seen before, a complex mix of hope, fear, love, and absolute honesty. "I want you to stay. Not because I need you, not because the government needs your advice, but because I cannot imagine this world without you in it. But I will not ask you to give up your own species for mine. That choice must be yours alone. Was quiet for a long time, looking out the laboratory's window at the crystal forests that had once seemed so alien and threatening. They were beautiful now, he realized. Different from Earth's green woodlands, but beautiful in their own way. This place had become home not because it was comfortable or familiar, but because it was where the people he cared about had chosen to build something new. The other survivors, he asked. 16 have decided to return to human space. 15 want to stay. The choice appears to be highly individual. Nodded, that sounded about right. Some people needed the familiar comfort of their own species. Others thrived on the challenge of something completely different. Both choices were valid. What about you? He asked. What happens to Queen if her human advisor disappears back into the galaxy? Skin brightened to warm gold. She continues building the future she dreamed of, perhaps a bit more lonely, but not alone. She has an entire civilization of people who believe in that dream. And if her human advisor decides he's tired of traveling and wants to see what that future looks like? The gold deepened, mixed with colors that spoke of joy and hope and possibilities that stretched into forever. Then perhaps she stops worrying about whether she's strong enough to lead alone and starts planning all the amazing things they might accomplish together. Smiled, the decision suddenly as clear as the crystal formations singing in the wind outside. He had spent his adult life exploring new worlds, seeking out the strange and unknown. But he had never found anything as alien and wonderful as this. A place where a human could help reshape a civilization, where friendship could topple empires, where the impossible happened so routinely that it started to feel normal. In that case, he said, I should probably get back to work. We've got a future to build, and it's not going to invent itself. Skin blazed with colors that had no human names, and realized that some things were universal across all species. Hope looked the same whether it was expressed in human smiles or bioluminescence. Love was recognizable no matter what form it took. And the future, uncertain as it always was, seemed a little brighter when you faced it with friends. Outside the laboratory, three suns set in their complex dance, painting the crystal forests in shades of light that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. And in a converted laboratory that had once been the crash site of a doomed colony ship, a human and an alien princess planned the next chapter of a story that was still being written among the stars.